Welcome back to the channel, my friends. Today we're diving deep into a topic that has fascinated humanity since the dawn of consciousness. It's a conversation that transcends the typical boundaries between science and spirituality, between the material and the immaterial. I know many of you have been asking me to address this fundamental question. Is there a scientific basis for believing in God? Can we reconcile our modern understanding of physics with the concept of a divine creator? Today, we're going to explore exactly that. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this is a topic that evokes strong emotions. Some of you might be skeptical, others might be deeply religious, and many are somewhere in between. I ask only that you approach this video with an open mind. My goal isn't to convert anyone, but to present a perspective that might challenge your current understanding, regardless of where you stand. Let's start with something the universe exists. You exist. I exist. The screen you're watching exists. But have you ever truly contemplated what existence actually means? What is the fundamental nature of reality? Modern physics tells us something remarkable. At the most fundamental level, everything in our universe behaves like a wave. Electrons, which we typically think of as particles, demonstrate wave-like properties in certain experiments. The same is true for all subatomic particles. This is the famous wave-particle duality that forms a cornerstone of quantum mechanics. But what if this duality isn't just a quirk of quantum mechanics? What if wave behavior is the fundamental reality, and what we perceive as particles and matter are simply manifestations of these waves? Think about light for a moment. We know that light is an electromagnetic wave. Depending on its frequency, it manifests as different colors. Infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays. They're all electromagnetic waves, just at different frequencies. What if we take this concept further? What if all forces in our universe, not just electromagnetism, but gravity, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, are actually different manifestations of the same fundamental wave phenomenon, just vibrating at different frequencies? This might sound like speculation, but it aligns with the grand unified theories that physicists have been pursuing for decades, theories that seek to unify all the fundamental forces of nature. String theory, for instance, proposes that all particles are actually tiny vibrating strings, and the different patterns of vibration determine the different particles and forces we observe. Now, here's where this gets interesting. If everything in our universe is fundamentally a wave pattern or a vibration, then we need to ask, what is doing the vibrating? What is the medium through which these waves propagate? In classical physics, waves require a medium. Sound waves travel through air, water waves through water. Early physicists thought electromagnetic waves traveled through a medium they called the ether. While the concept of the ether, as they understood it, was eventually disproven, the question remains, what is the substance of reality itself? This brings us to a profound insight. Perhaps what we call empty space isn't empty at all. Perhaps it's filled with an infinite field of potential, what some might call the mind of God. You see, one of the most puzzling aspects of quantum physics is that particles can seemingly appear from nothing. Quantum fluctuations in what we call the vacuum can produce particle-antiparticle pairs that pop into existence and then annihilate each other. But how can something come from nothing? The answer might be that it doesn't. Perhaps what we call nothing is actually a field of infinite potential, a field of thought, if you will, from which all material reality manifests. Consider the famous equation E=mc². Energy and mass are equivalent. They're different manifestations of the same-tid energy. Energy is liberated mass. And at the most fundamental level, this energy takes the form of waves, vibrations in the fabric of reality. If all energy is vibration and all mass is concentrated energy, then everything in our material universe is ultimately a vibration or a thought in what we might call the mind of God. This is not mere poetic metaphor. When we look at the nature of electromagnetic waves, we see something remarkable. They can exist and propagate without a material medium. Unlike sound waves or water waves, electromagnetic waves can travel through the vacuum of space. They are, in a sense, self-sustaining patterns of energy. And here's where we approach something truly profound. These electromagnetic waves, these patterns of energy, can create entire universes of experience. consider your dreams. When you sleep, your brain generates electromagnetic patterns, thoughts essentially, that create entire worlds filled with experiences that feel completely real while you're in them. These dream worlds have no physical substance, yet they exist as experiences in your consciousness. What if our physical universe operates on a similar principle, just at a grander scale? What if it's a thought in the mind of God, a pattern of electromagnetic waves at various frequencies, manifesting as what we perceive to be physical reality? The physicist Max Planck, one of the founders of quantum theory, once said, "All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter." What Planck was suggesting is that consciousness, mind, might be more fundamental than matter. Matter might be what happens when mind focuses and concentrates energy into specific patterns. Let's consider another angle. We know that our thoughts are associated with electromagnetic activity in our brains. Every thought you have generates a pattern of electromagnetic waves. These waves are invisible and have no mass, yet they can lead to profound physical effects when translated into actions. If our thoughts, our consciousness, can generate electromagnetic patterns that ultimately influence physical reality, is it so far-fetched to consider that a greater consciousness might generate the electromagnetic patterns that constitute physical reality itself? This brings us to the concept that we are made in the image of God, not in a physical sense. God, being the source of all physical reality, would not have a physical form as we understand it. Rather, we are made in God's image in that we share in the creative power of consciousness. Our thoughts create experiences, just as God's thoughts create reality. We exist in all manifestations and dimensions because we are patterns of energy within the greater pattern that is the mind of God. We are thoughts within a thought, dreams within a dream, waves within a wave. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds like pantheism, the idea that God is everything and everything is God. But there's a subtle difference. While we exist within God's thought, we are not inherently God, just as characters in a novel exist within the author's mind but are not the author. We are reflections of the divine mind made in its image, but we are not the entirety of that mind. We are waves in an ocean, not the ocean itself. Let's address an objection that many skeptics might raise. If God created everything, then who created God? This question assumes that God is a being within the universe, subject to the same laws of causality as everything else. But if God is the fundamental reality, the field of infinite potential from which everything manifests, then God was not created. God is what is, was, and always will be. This aligns with the concept in many religious traditions that God is eternal and uncreated. It also aligns with scientific principles. In physics, we recognize that certain fundamental laws and constants simply exist. They're not derived from anything more basic. Similarly, the field of infinite potential that we might call God is not derived from anything more fundamental. It is the fundamental reality itself. Another objection might be, but science explains the universe without needing to invoke God. This is true in a sense. Science does an excellent job of describing how the universe works, the patterns and relationships within it. But science has struggled to explain why there is a universe at all, why there is something rather than nothing. The physicist Stephen Hawking once asked, what is it that breathes fire into the equations and makes a universe for them to describe? Science describes the rules of the game, but doesn't explain why the game exists or why it has the particular rules it does. Atheists and many scientists will struggle to explain the existence of the material universe without invoking something like God, because the alternative is to suggest that everything came from nothing, which, as I mentioned earlier, would indeed be the greatest and most impossible magic. Now let's delve deeper into how this understanding connects to the specific forces we observe in our universe. We've discussed how electromagnetic waves manifest differently depending on their frequency. At the frequencies we can perceive, they appear as visible light. At higher frequencies, they become ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays. At lower frequencies, they become infrared, microwaves, and radio waves. But what about the other fundamental forces? Gravity, for instance, seems very different from electromagnetism. Yet, what if gravity is not a primary force, but a secondary effect? What if it emerges when localized concentrations of energy, what we call mass, distort the fabric of space-time? Einstein's general relativity describes gravity not as a force in the conventional sense, but as a curvature of space-time caused by the presence of mass and energy. Mass tells space-time how to curve, and curved space-time tells mass how to move. But where does mass come from? From energy, as Einstein's EM-sequence tells us. And energy, as we've discussed, we've understood as vibrations or waves in the field of potential that underlies reality. So gravity, rather than being a separate force, could be understood as an emergent property of concentrated electromagnetic waves, a secondary effect that arises when energy is localized in specific patterns. Similarly, the strong nuclear force which holds atomic nuclei together despite the electromagnetic repulsion between protons might be understood as extremely high-energy electromagnetic waves. The patterns of these waves create what we perceive as the strong force, binding quarks together to form protons and neutrons, and binding protons and neutrons together to form atomic nuclei. And the weak nuclear force, responsible for processes like radioactive decay, might be an intermediate frequency manifestation of the same fundamental field, mediating the transformation of certain particles into others. This unified view of forces as different manifestations of the same fundamental field aligns with the goals of unified field theories in physics. It suggests that the diversity we observe in our universe, the different forces, particles, and phenomena, emerges from a single underlying reality, just as the diverse colours of the rainbow emerge from the same white light when refracted through a prism. This brings us back to our main theme. If all forces and all matter are different manifestations of the same fundamental field, and if this field can be understood as the thought or the mind of God, then everything in our universe is indeed a manifestation of divine thought. We are part of God's energy because we are patterns within the greater pattern. We are part of God's thought because we are thoughts within the greater thought. Now let's address another profound implication of this perspective, the nature of knowledge and consciousness. If God is the fundamental reality from which everything emerges, and if we are patterns within that reality, then in a sense, God knows everything because everything is a manifestation of God. There is nothing outside of God to know. This connects to the concept in many religious traditions that God is omniscient, all-knowing. Not because God is constantly gathering and processing information like a cosmic supercomputer, but because everything that exists is an expression of God's being. Similarly, our own consciousness, our awareness, might be understood as a localized expression of the universal consciousness that is God. Just as a wave in the ocean is both part of the ocean and an individual expression of it, our consciousness is both part of the universal consciousness and an individual expression of it. This perspective offers a bridge between science and spirituality. It suggests that the material universe studied by science and the realm of consciousness explored by spirituality are not separate domains but different aspects of the same unified reality. Let's now consider some of the symbolic and esoteric dimensions of this understanding. In many religious and mystical traditions, heaven is represented by a circle, which symbolizes unity, wholeness, and the infinite. The material world, in contrast, is often represented by a square, symbolizing structure, limitation, and manifested reality. The tools of creation, the compass and square used in sacred geometry and in traditions like Freemasonry, represent the principles by which the infinite, the circle, becomes manifest as the finite, the square. The compass draws circles, symbolizing the divine, while the square measures right angles, symbolizing the material world. These symbols point to the ancient understanding that our material reality emerges from and is contained within a greater, unified reality. And they suggest that the knowledge we're discussing isn't new, but antediluvian, predating recorded history, preserved in symbols and myths across cultures. And what is the purpose of our souls in this material illusion? Many traditions suggest it's to learn the knowledge of good and evil, to develop moral awareness and free will through the experience of duality and choice. In a unified field of consciousness, there is no separation, no other, and therefore no moral choice. It's only in a realm of apparent separation that ethics becomes possible. This brings us to another profound insight. If our material reality is a thought in the mind of God, a pattern of energy vibrating at different frequencies, then it's not ultimately real in the absolute sense. It's real as an experience, just as your dreams are real while you're in them, but it's not the fundamental reality. This doesn't mean our lives don't matter or that our choices are meaningless. On the contrary, if life is a kind of dream in the mind of God, a learning environment for souls, then how we live and the choices we are of supreme importance. They're the very purpose of this magnificent creation. So, where does this leave us? How might this understanding change how we live? First, it suggests a profound unity underlying the apparent diversity of our world. If everything is a manifestation of the same divine thought, then the divisions we perceive between people, between nations, between species, are not ultimate realities, but patterns within the greater pattern. Second, it suggests that consciousness is not a mere byproduct of material processes, but a fundamental aspect of reality. Your thoughts, your awareness, your inner life is not just a side effect of neurons firing, but a localized expression of the universal consciousness. Third, it suggests that the material world, while real as an experience, is not the ultimate reality. Like a wave on the ocean, it arises, takes form, and returns to the source. This can free us from excessive attachment to material things and open us to a more expansive understanding of our existence. Scene transition, footage of natural beauty, mountains, forests, oceans. Living with this awareness doesn't mean withdrawing from the world. On the contrary, it means engaging with it more fully, more consciously, recognizing the divine in every person we meet, in every challenge we face, in every joy we experience. It means approaching science not as separate from spirituality, but as a way of understanding the patterns within the divine thought. It means approaching religion not as opposed to science, but as a way of connecting with the source of those patterns. Before we conclude, I want to address something important. The perspective I've shared today is not the only valid way to understand reality. It's an interpretation, a framework that I find illuminating and that resonates with both scientific principles and spiritual insights across traditions. Whether you embrace this perspective or not, I encourage you to remain open to the mystery of existence. The fact that anything exists at all, that there is something rather than nothing, is perhaps the greatest mystery of all. In contemplating this mystery, we touch something beyond our ordinary awareness. So, my friends, as we come to the end of today's exploration, I invite you to sit with these ideas, consider them, question them, integrate what resonates with your own understanding and experience, and remember that ultimately, the truth of existence is not something to be grasped intellectually, but to be experienced directly. Beyond concepts and theories lies the simple wonder of being, the miracle of awareness, the gift of this moment. If you found value in today's discussion, please consider supporting this channel. Contributions allow me to continue creating content that explores these profound questions at the intersection of science, philosophy, and spirituality. And if you're interested in delving deeper into the ancient symbolism we touched on today, I've written an in-depth article that's available through the link in the description. Thank you for joining me on this journey of exploration. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and remember that the greatest mysteries might be found not in the stars above, but in the awareness within. And one more thing before you go. I believe that understanding these concepts isn't just an intellectual exercise. It can transform how we live. So here's a simple practice to integrate this awareness into your daily life. Each morning when you wake up, take a moment before rising to remember that you are a thought in the mind of God, a wave in the ocean of consciousness. Feel the connection between your individual awareness and the universal awareness from which it arises. Then, as you move through your day, try to recognize the same divine presence in others, not just intellectually, but experientially. Look into the eyes of the people you meet and remember that they too are manifestations of the same infinite field of consciousness. This simple practice can gradually shift your perception from separation to unity, from isolation to connection. And in that shift lies the potential for profound personal transformation. Thank you again for your attention and openness. I'll see you in the next video.